Hey everyone, I'm Eric from Lonesome Reader, and I'm here with Anna again to talk about our predictions for the shortlist for the Women's Prize for Fiction this year, or our wish list.
Yes.
It's more our wish list,
Yeah.
I think, than it will be actually like our authoritative opinion or something like that. Even if, not that, yeah, we are authorities, but yeah. So I think this is going to be such an interesting discussion. Some of these books I think we'll have very different opinions on, and some of these books, honestly, I don't totally know how I feel yet. I have very mixed feelings about some of them.
This is the first year I've ever tried to read the long list. Normally I just wait for the short list.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting
it's
for
been
me
very
to be
diligent
able
this
to
year.
like... You know, I would have got all of them finished if it wasn't for my book deadline. But I'm very nearly there.
Well,
so.
that's the more important thing. But
Yeah.
trying to read all the books on the list, and actually I've not totally completed the list either, which is a bit more shameful. I don't have as much an excuse. I've allowed myself to get diverged by other books coming out.
This is
and
for
stuff.
fun.
Yeah, so it's like, yeah, you never want to like set it as a task. Like, I must read all these books.
But we'll flag one way talking about those, how informed we are. So we're going to go through each book alphabetically. And then we're going to say whether it's on our personal
Yes.
shong list. Shong list?
Shong list? What's that?
Short, long list.
Short.
But I mean short list. A
Short
shong
list. A shong
Okay,
list.
so are you ready?
Yes.
In
Let's get into it.
alphabetical order, the first book is
Pat Barker.
The Sands of the Girls.
I'd read this after. I mean, we might as well say like there's two books on the list that are sort of retellings of Greek myths set in the time that they're set of this mythological time.
It's really early in the morning when
It
we're
is.
filming this.
It's quite early, yeah. So we're still waking up a bit. And so this is the first one, and deals with a woman who's in a city that's pillaged by Achilles.
Brices? Yeah.
Yeah, Brices. I forget her name. Yeah.
Because I've just read all of them.
Yeah. So yeah, she's much more keyed in. I just really enjoyed the story of a mythology which I don't know a whole lot about. You know, it mainly focuses on the point of view of this woman and the other woman that have basically become slaves in this empire that's captured them.
Although you say that, but it is
that's the premise.
Yeah.
But the actual experience of the story
is, for me, I think that I have a two-pronged. I think I would have felt this anyway, that it's for a book that sort of purports to give a voice to the women of these stories, it's a lot about Achilles.
It is. Yeah.
It's really, and even when Achilles, even if you're in Bryce's voice, so there's Bryce's first person, and then there's Achilles' story in the third person. Mm-hmm. And even when you're with Bryce, it's still a lot about Achilles. The way it's set up, I was sort of expecting something different. Mm-hmm. And also, though, I had read 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes earlier this year, which is very much the same concept as The Fall of Troy from the perspective of the women. And I just loved that book so much. It's one of my favourite books of the year. Mm. And that is very much, like, Achilles is a cameo in that book. And it's told from many different women or groups of women. Just as a book, I preferred it. It's a bit more playful with structure and a bit more creative. This is quite a straightforward, linear story. I got so frustrated reading it. This is kind of spoiled. No, it's The Fall of Troy. But I ended up writing. Can you see that? No.
Just no.
in the thing, because I got so annoyed by it. It's the bit where she's like, Bryce is like, so this was no longer straightforwardly a meeting of owner and slave. There was an element of choice, and I was just like, no. Okay, there isn't. She's still a slave being raped continuously. And I just felt like it romanticised Achilles so much. And I know he's in many ways seen as a romantic hero, but I just don't think you can. It's a bit like trying to have your cake and eat it. I also wrote apologies for the swears. Why is it all about fucking Achilles? Because by the end I was so annoyed by how much it was about Achilles, and it's about romanticising him, and I don't feel like you can have both stories in one book.
Yeah, I mean, he is a murderer and a rapist.
But I like her writing very much. Do you know, I enjoyed reading the book. I kind of wanted the last page where Bryce is like, I'm going to find my story, and I'm like, I thought that's what this was. That's what I wanted.
Why didn't you start with that?
I'm like, right, that's the ending was like, okay, but this is the book that's the book I want to read, and instead I just feel like I had the introduction that was a lot about Achilles. So I didn't hate it, but I would just read 1,000 Ships instead.
Right, yeah.
Basically.
Which hasn't actually been published yet.
No,
has it?
imminently. I think maybe it's the very beginning of May, the actual pub date.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And I'd be interested to know why Pat Barker, how she would justify writing it in that way.
I just feel like it's sort of bashed up, the two things bashed up against, because it's not that she doesn't talk about that. Like, Bryce is in many ways, like at the end, is very angry about that, and it doesn't not refer to it as rape. Like, it's not trying to soften what has happened to her, but then it's also trying to have this empathy for Achilles.
Fair enough.
Okay, so...
And I think I just had a much less complicated reading experience of it.
So, is it on your personal shortlist? No. Oh, no, not on yours either. Okay,
No.
interesting. By Pat.
Sorry.
Remembered by Yvonne Battle-Felton, which I have read. This is one of the ones I've read about 2/3 of this.
Never read all of it. So.
And then I realised I wasn't going to get... I needed to stop if I was going to read the last one at all. So, and also because I wasn't super getting on with it.
For me, it's one of those novels that... thinking about it in retrospect, it feels a lot more meaningful than the actual experience of reading it. You know how sometimes when you think about, I'll like think back on it and think like, oh, it's so interesting how it handled this themes and these ideas, and then but you know actually reading it is a bit challenging to read in a way because her writing style is really interesting in a way, but then in another way is a bit frustrating as a reader. Because I found it difficult at some points to actually understand what was going on and who the characters were.
I was confused at times.
Yeah.
Like just little bits like there's the point where there's a big chunk of the book is set on a plantation, and there's two characters called James.
Yeah.
Like there's little James and there's big James, but sometimes they're just referred to as James, and I kept getting confused. It's one of those books that I didn't like. You know, most of the time when you read, you automatically just have a picture in your head of what's going on. I just didn't have. Like, I often was confused about characters, just where they physically were or who they were in relation to other people. And it's not a challenging book in the sense that it's not like linguistically challenging, is it? No, there's books that are more dense or linguistically challenging, which I found clearer to understand. And this was just a bit of a logistical thing, I thought, and maybe just a bit of
a feeling like, like you say, that having a picture in your head of the characters and the scene and the
really,
situation.
Like, getting into the book, and even though it's a book that I almost felt like, I'm like, oh my god, like, I almost felt like made me feel like I must be like callous to not be able to, like, because it's some pretty brutal, awful stuff.
Yeah.
And also it is. And I think that because I was less emotionally engaged, then when the really bad stuff happens, it kind of comes a bit more out of the blue because you're not sort of, and it's just like reading this like abrupt, traumatic. There's some really, really awful stuff that's more just like for information if you're considering reading these books.
But what I did love was the complexity of some of the characters, and I love it when novels do this because I think it really makes you challenge your own ideas about people and their motivations and why they do what they do, because there's a particular character who does some very awful things, but it's because of the situation she's in, and she has come to the conclusion that this is what she needs to do because otherwise the alternative is too horrible. And so like on the outside, you want to condemn her actions, but then she's in an impossible situation. Yeah. So I really appreciated how it did that, and just like the overall sort of sweep of the novel, looking at like history and stories and how those stories are passed down and all that.
And also I'm aware that I'm 2/3 through, and I feel like from what you said about it, it's a book that maybe come like as a whole, like where you said like while you were reading it,
like reflect on.
Yeah. So I am planning on finishing the two that I haven't finished by Monday when the shortlist is announced. But thus far that's my reading experience.
Okay, fair enough.
So,
shall we vote?
Yes, not really a surprise here, but no, not on my list. Unless like the last third of it really pulls it together spectacularly. My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite.
And this is the only novel that I haven't read any of it yet.
Because I thought this was a really fun read that was well executed, but it didn't necessarily have anything that elevated it for me, and it's not one that I particularly thought about since I finished reading it. But I would actually I enjoyed reading it more than I enjoyed reading some of the others. I did think it's very well executed and well written and well put together. I just almost wanted just a bit more, like another level or layer.
And that's pretty much the opinion I've heard from most everyone, which is why I haven't really prioritized it and said, like, I have to read this.
It's really enjoyable read, and it's like a really like dark comedy, and I enjoyed reading it. Also, it's really quick because it's really short chapters. So you could read it, and you wouldn't take you very long to read, but not doing anything sort of unusual enough for me. And that's the thing I'm thinking about in terms of an award shortlist. That's the thing.
Yeah.
And I actually wouldn't hesitate to recommend it to many people. But thinking about it in terms of this collection of books and being put on a big book award shortlist is just not kind of doing enough for me to be at that level.
Yeah, and when you start thinking some of the other books that could have been on the
Right.
list, you're
No,
like,
you kind of
how
feel,
could
because
you?
actually, if I'd read this like outside of
elevate this
this,
a
I
bit?
probably would have been like, this is great, I recommend it. But then in comparison to some of the other books, it's not on the same sort of playing field for me.
Yeah, and I think with all the books, we're probably going to be harsher than we would
Yes,
if we'd just been reading them outside of a prize,
absolutely.
which just happens. But I mean, yeah, that's what prizes do.
The
It forces
nature
you
of
to
it,
really
yeah.
scrutinize it and like pick it apart and say like,
In a way that I wouldn't normally. And several of these books actually fall into that category. Not a surprise.
no,
Another
and
no.
this is not based on anything, but yeah,
No,
just from other
that's
people's
not
opinions.
Fair. Okay. Next is...
I can't wait to talk about this.
Next is the Pisces by Mr. Broder, which I'm going to do a... What do I mean? The word where you're going to... I can't remember. I can't speak this morning. The thing where you say something before you say something to like justify what you're going to say.
Like
A
disclaimer, yeah.
Disclaimer. I feel like I've been... Because I didn't like this book, I feel like, and then it's been longlisted, I feel almost like I've pushed myself into this like very extreme corner about it. But I read it without thinking about it in terms of the list. I also read it, I feel like I also need to make it clear that I read this over a year ago. So
Yeah,
I'm also
quite
like
distant in your
really,
memory.
I'm like slightly hesitant, even though my memory of it is I hate it. I'm like hesitant because it's not fresh in my memory to go to, I don't know, I'm like conflict. I don't want to like go there, and then if I reread it I'd be like, oh actually it's not as bad as I remembered or thinking about it anyway. But I didn't like it.
And it's funny because in like our predictions list, like I think I cut out totally.
Oh yeah, we did talk
the whole
about it, didn't
we talked about it
Yeah.
quite a lot in the predictions list, and I think because of time I cut it out, but I was fully prepared for it to be a book like First Love by Gwendolyn Riley, where I was like, oh well, if Anna thinks that, I'm gonna think that too, and totally prepared to hate it. But I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really fun. Dealt with a lot of issues to do with like modern identity and relationships and sort of self-consciousness and the physicality of our bodies. But it's a novel that I understand why a lot of people will have strong feelings about or objections to, or just have, as a personal taste thing, like this isn't something.
Yeah, because so
that
much
I
of that, like I agree with what you're saying, and actually I was talking to Matthew about this on Twitter on DM, and
Matthew Sharp.
everything, like 90% of what he was saying, I was like, I completely agree with you. It's just that I don't like reading it. But I
Right.
get, like, I hated it. There is, and I said this when it was longlisted, so I totally accept that a lot of that is just personal taste. I think also it's that whole, I thought it was going to be a more whimsical, magical realism, literary, kind of like sexy whimsy, and it's really not that. And I think partly as well I was expecting something very different, and that kind of was like, it's very crass and vulgar at times. Yeah.
Yeah,
At times, I said.
Yeah, at times. I just sort of twinge at the word vulgar because it just evokes to me a sort of judgmentalness that I sort of react a bit badly to, because I feel like she's describing things in like a lot of detail to do with sex and the body, and it's like, but in a way, that's just the truth. There are gross things about our bodies, and
which, yes,
but maybe there are ways of handling that.
Okay, I think the thing is, there's one scene in particular, where she meets that man in the bathroom, and I think that's really what I'm talking about.
Right.
That I thought that just took it to a level where I think that was like crass. But again, not that I don't think she should have done it. It made me feel physically like unwell reading it, and I just didn't think it needed to be. It almost was like I felt like it was almost like fetishizing the kind of grossness at times. Which a lot of the scenes I was like, I get why she was doing that, and like you said, I totally agree that like in many ways it's refreshing to read a very like no nonsense real book about bodies. But I think there was just some scenes for me where I just felt she pushed it to the point where it was trying to shock and trying to be crass.
Yeah, there's a fine line there where.
And for me, there was scenes where it went over the. But I totally get your point. But there was some scenes I just felt like it was too, like it pushed it too far, almost for the point of like being gross. And then the only thing I would say that like on a non just like taste level is I did feel like I found it very predictable. And like the dog storyline, as soon as that's introduced, you're like, well, that's how that's gonna end. And I would have liked, again, because it's like a weird book about a merman, you know. I think I would have just liked a bit more like whimsy and weirdness, and like I just found the plot a little bit predictable. A lot of it, I wouldn't say don't read it, but I would be specific about who I recommended it to.
Right. Yeah. Do you find I'd just be interested to know, like, did you find it difficult reading about her because she's quite a nasty person in a lot of ways? Or?
So I think also
because I've seen a lot of objections to this book because other people just don't like her, and she's
not
like
likable.
No, and she's not a feminist. She like actively like seeks validation from having sex with other men.
Dodgy on mental health stuff as well. The way she deals with her friend, the woman she meets at the group therapy.
Yeah,
is, like,
she goes
terrible.
to a group, and the way she sort of talks about and refers to a lot of the people in the group there, or sort of portrays them. Maybe one of the only things I hated in this book is that the portrayal of that friend. I think she's called Claire, who's English, and just because of the way she portrayed her Englishness and the way she used a lot of English idioms, really felt off to me, like totally untrue, and took me out of it and made me feel like that this character wasn't believable at all. I couldn't understand. But although it did make me sort of wonder, because Britta Bowler out there, her reaction to this book, she just read it as total satire, and it made me like wonder, like, is this book total satire? Because it almost makes it a play on sort of like Devil Wears Prada, of sort of like the English friend who just is sort of like spouting these like English phrases. I mean, and stuff.
It is surely. I feel like I can only read it as some level of satire.
Yeah. And I think, but it's just weird because, like, I mean, I think it is. She's sort of satirizing these things about modern life and about how self-consumed this protagonist is. But like also in a way, like I felt like I could relate to her in a lot of ways of just like, you know, sort of thinking if I was going to be acting on my worst impulses.
But the thing is, you don't. And I just think, like the thing is, people don't always ask. Very, very few people act on their worst impulses all the time. Even people who are in a really bad way. And I think that's for me. I was just like, stop being a terrible person. But a lot of it, I get that's where she's at. But like, for some of it, I don't know. I just felt like the book, I was just a bit like, I'm not sure what it's trying to do.
And you get to like a logical place in your life where you know, like, I have this impulse, but I know it's not going to bring me any fulfillment or happiness. It's going to hurt
other people, so I'm not going to do it. I guess I don't want to read a book about someone giving in to their worst impulses. Well, I wanted to read a sexy book about a merman. Someone write that. Look at the cover. I wanted it to be like...
Although when it does get to the parts where they're engaged...
It's not sexy and like a... I wanted a sexy, like a romantic sexy. So,
whereas I mostly just really enjoyed it. But yeah, again, I would be careful about who I recommended.
I think you like Miranda July.
Right, yeah.
Although Miranda July is better. For that level of like... for want of a better word, crassness, that kind of like, what's the better way? Like a very visceral, explicit view of bodies and sex. Maybe that's a better way.
But also like a hyper level of like self-consciousness and just like always like thinking about yourself and like, what's the meaning of life? And like, and all these like big, sort of questions.
Although she get there? No, she does not.
So I'm guessing it'll be
this is a no.
But it's also no for me.
Next. Milkman by Anna Burns.
Booker Prize winning Milkman.
Which I left to last because I convinced myself that I wasn't going to like it because, I don't know, I feel like kind of because it won the Booker and also because it hasn't really got any chapters and it's very dense And also just because I'd heard from a few people that they hadn't really got on with it and they felt like it was hard work. And people saying, oh, I had to read it on audio. So I left it then thinking, oh, it's one the book, everyone knows about it. And then now I love it.
But you're about
I'm
a
about
third
a third
to a half.
third to a half the way through. So I haven't finished reading it, but I'm annoyed at myself for leaving it to last because I really love it.
Ah,
I'm kind of annoyed at myself as well because I'm like, I did win I was like, not that I think I'm above the book, but like, I just to be like less invested in that prize because of I haven't enjoyed reading the books as much, but I really love it. I started reading it and I was just like entranced by it. I haven't found it. It is dense. Like you have to really concentrate on it, but I haven't found it like difficult. Not difficult, but like I find it very readable and enjoyable. I find it really funny and I found it very readable. But maybe the cumulative effect as well, you know, like I'm a third of the way through, maybe the cumulative effect of that style is gonna start weighing on me. Stream of consciousness is just really working for me. It was like a fable, isn't it? Because you don't have anyone's real names. I like how it sort of breaks all the rules it's supposed to do. Like things like there's lots of words repeated in sentences, which you're not supposed to do. And she does it to great effect, almost like reading, not like reading poetry per se, but it just breaks a lot of the rules, but she manages to make it work. I think she's also really great on like femininity and the way that like men are the worst. There's like a passage I just read where she talks about this man, not the milkman, like the one of the like this guy who's hitting on her who's a contemporary of hers, and the way he talks at her trying to impress her, and the way he thinks he's impressing her and he's just putting her off, and she just describes it in this way that I'm like I've been there, and she just describes it in this really funny, good, true. I just I'm really, really enjoying it.
And there were sections of the book that I just thought were sublimely beautiful, really intelligent and fascinating, and looking at things from a way I haven't read before. But then I didn't have quite the same experience of just enjoying it so much. I mean, I think even to the point where you've got actually like almost immediately, I think the opening passage I just like loved, and then suddenly got to this part where I was like, oh, okay, and it was sort of like pushing myself through it. And then quite a lot of the book I felt I just had to push myself through, and so that's why I described it as challenging and difficult to read. And that's been a big thing about this novel after it won the Booker Prize, that there was a lot of reaction against. Of some people said, including the chair of the judges, said that it was a challenging and difficult book to read, and I think a lot of people who had the same reading experience of you, who found it quite funny and not at all difficult to read in that way, just like, well, why are you describing it that way? Because
it puts people off.
Yeah, and are afraid of putting people off.
It's easy to read. I mean, like you have to concentrate. But anyway, sorry.
But also, I think that the way it's written, where there's a lot of lists, there's a lot of circular thoughts that are sort of going over the same thing again and again, and I totally understand why she's doing that, because she's simulating this experience of this woman who is, I mean, and at heart she's a very sympathetic character. She's somebody who just wants to read her books and be left alone, basically. But she's forced because of the community she lives in and the political climate.
She's set in the troubles.
Yeah. Just overall, to me, it felt like a bit of a slog to read.
And I do also think that like it is, you know, it's dense, and I must admit I would probably arguably prefer it to be broken up a bit. I think I would have enjoyed it even more if there was a few more breaks in it.
Right.
But that not having that hasn't been a barrier to me still being able to enjoy it.
In a way, if the novel is written like My Sister the Serial Killer, where it's very like short chapters, you feel like you can you go through it at a pace. And actually, another novel does that very well, which I'm going to talk about. Now, I just feel like I have a very complicated relationship with this novel now. I mean, it's a novel I know definitely if I read it, I would get a lot more out of it and see things that I probably didn't see the first go around. But then, you know, I just sort of worry as well that like I'll be reminded that there are some sections which I was just sort of like, I don't know why you're lingering on this or going on about this. But then there are other parts that I just loved and did find really funny. I find her sisters hilarious, and the whole relationship with the sisters really funny, because they almost act as like this chorus, sort of talking to her, and they're just always like repeating what Manny says, and I found her whole relationship with them so funny, and that sibling relationship.
I think her relationship with her mother is brilliant. I mean, again, I haven't finished it yet, so I'm also aware of that.
I don't want to give any spoilers, but there are some characters, like the mother, are much more complicated than they first appear, and so it does, like, I think, develop the characters as it goes along. They don't stay on
That's one thing I like about the mother.
thing.
I feel like already, like, I find she's initially presented as this almost like caricature of a Catholic Irish mother, and then already you see that that's no one is just that sort of caricature of anything, and I'm really,
and especially
really
in this climate and situation, people feel like they have to hide parts of their identity and selves to just blend in, because you don't want to stand out in this in this situation.
I am going to tentatively give this my first yes, even though I haven't finished it.
And I was really debating about it, but I just feel like in looking at the books as a group.
Freshwater by Akwaeke and Emezi.
Which, side note, like, obviously one of the worst covers, ugliest covers. I mean, it's a bold choice.
But like, I don't think it quite.
Yeah, and I mean, Faber makes some bold choices with their covers, and I understand why they would just have text and want us to go that route, but I think it really doesn't. I mean, it's not appealing for a lot of. I mean, the US cover has a nice design and image on it, which I think works a lot better. This novel, I also have really complicated feelings.
This is the one I'm the most conflicted about, I would say.
Okay, yeah.
And this is going to be talking about it out of order, but one thing you said when I was watching a video or reading a review? I don't know. Just you on the internet talking about Lost Children Archive.
Oh, right.
Because you said about that book that the author had said that she felt like she had to write. She wrote about her experiences in non-fiction first. Yeah. And she felt like she had to do that before she could write the novel. Mm-hmm. I feel like with this, maybe she should have done that.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And it made me. I was reading this while I listened to you talk about that, and I was like, oh my goodness, it's the opposite. I just feel like she was really clearly driven by this story that she had to tell, which is massively rooted in their own personal experience.
Yes.
Okay, so Emezi is non-binary trans, but Faber has made the choice to. They're referred to as she in the blurb on the book, but I think that's wrong. Or not wrong, but that's not right anymore. Right,
so Akwaeke Emezi now says in sort of bio that uses the pronouns they and
okay, right. So I feel like they've been massively motivated by the need to tell their story, which is rooted in their life. And I feel like as a novel it suffers a bit because of that desire to stick to that structure and explore certain things. And I kind of feel like I wish that they'd written a memoir or even like very like creative memoir non-fiction, and then maybe written a novel inspired by similar themes, because I just felt those bits of it out. It's just like, as a novel this doesn't work, even though it's actually it's quite powerful in itself.
Talking about personal experience, totally agree. And it is very inventively written, the whole concept of it, that it's narrated not from the perspective of this young individual. It's narrated from the perspective of multiple gods or spirits that inhabit Ada. Yeah, Ada, and they even refer to her as the Ada, because she's just seen as this sort of vessel that they're inhabiting before going on to other people in different lives. Part of the whole meaning and like power of the book is it's forcing you to think from a point of view that we're not accustomed to thinking of. People in the West reading this, read things from a very Western point of view, and would look at this character and see like, oh, this is somebody with like multiple personality disorder, or sort of psychologize it in some way.
And the characters in the book do that to them as well.
I personally had some hang-ups on the way it was presented and the characters was presented, because first off, there's a huge amount of like issues covered in the book, from like eating disorders to like sexual abuse to issues to do with transgendered identity, and those are handled quite like briefly in terms of just how like big these issues are. I felt it sort of like glances over them. So in a sort of like plot wise, I had some difficulties with that. But then a big personal hang up that I had was when one of the identities, one of the spirits that inhabits Ada is a man. I think there's only one like sort of identified male spirit that inhabits her. And the spirit basically only comes up when Ada has a sexual encounter with another woman. And to me, that I'm gonna like completely own, this is a very personal thing of just me reading it a certain way, whereas I fully respect and identify that this is just the characters and the author's experience, but me reading that, I see that just as a very like heteronormative thing of that to have the same sex encounter, this male spirit comes up to have sex with them. It just sort of grates with me personally because as like a gay man, if I've said I'm in a same sex relationship and then you're like, oh well, which of you is the woman, or
right,
like, you know,
right.
of sort of imposing this idea that well, you must psychologically explain your relationships in terms of male female rather than just like, well, no, we're just two men who are together. And so it felt confusing to me that the only same-sex encounter in the novel is sort of presented in that way. That sort of grated with me personally, but I know that's just a personal thing. So
it's interesting. I must admit, I also read it and then I had googled. I was just looking for reviews, and the book is hyper autobiographical.
Right.
And
actually, I haven't done that.
Makes
so I don't
me
know.
like really not sure how I feel about loads of it because. The author believes that they are the same. They have multiple spirits living inside them, and I don't want to be disrespectful of other people's beliefs, but in this way that I am an atheist and don't believe in anything. But also, I don't know, it makes it really complicated to talk about because that person believes that fully, but then what do you do if you don't think that is a possibility for somebody? And for them, that's the way that's dictated. Like, I had a really intense experience with elements of it to do with the sexual violence and the way that's interpreted and dealt with, but very much through the lens of these spirits, gods. And then it made me feel confused, finding out then that the author feels as though that is their experience, and it made me feel again a bit conflicted about how I felt about that. I kind of wish I didn't know that it was really, really autobiographical. And I feel like for me there was really interesting elements. I didn't think it worked as a novel, as a piece of fiction. Yeah. But I felt really, really conflicted about a lot of elements of the book. I really don't know how I feel about some of it, and I don't know how should it be valid, that how much should the book stand alone? How valid is it that I know that it's hyper autobiographical? Does that affect how that does affect how I see the book, but does it affect its literary worth? Like, I feel like really like tangled up in my thoughts about this one. Yeah, and I think I basically like agree overall, but you know, I sort of enjoy that aspect, that it's really challenged my ideas and make me think about these things. But I think as a novel, as a work of fiction, I don't know if it's a complete and sort of satisfying experience as other I agree
books on the list are. So
on that note, this is another no for me.
It's a no for me.
I found it very interesting, and I've thought a lot about it.
So
right, next up, Ordinary People by Diana Evans.
And I'm only about halfway through this novel. I haven't read it fully yet.
Okay.
But it's sort of funny in a way, my experience of this, because it's sort of set in contemporary South London, roughly about the story of two couples, and it's set in a location in South London that is very close in my neighborhood. So she's talking about landmarks and restaurants and even bus routes that I'm familiar with. So like I sort of feel like I know this location totally and completely identify it. But I'm finding the novels a bit dragging a bit for me, and that's why I haven't finished it yet, because there's a lot of detail in it. I understand why she's including all that. These characters feel very real. The way that she writes about them, I feel like I can totally understand appreciate them, but at the same time, there's not a huge amount of plot. Like I think 100 pages go by, and pretty much all that's happened is there's been a party, and but it's very much about the nuance of their relationships and where they are in their lives and figuring it out. And I totally appreciate that. I happen to have been reading this over the past couple of weeks when I've been really busy and distracted, and so it's not the sort of novel that's sort of propelling me through the story. It's more a novel that I just sort of feel like it's good, it's fine, that I have no objections to it, but it's and that may sound very condescending, but it's just how my experience of it, that
I'm only laughing because I love it and read it really quickly.
Oh,
and
okay.
found it really
That's
engaging.
funny. Wow.
But then it's interesting because I did start reading it on a 2-hour train journey. But I read it in just over a day.
Oh, wow.
It was brilliant. And also I thought I wasn't going to get on with it at all, because I normally don't like books about like not books about relationships, but like basically like relationships falling apart. I just find it really stressful to read about and really sad. And it is, the one thing is I thought it was very melancholy. On the front of the paperback, the quotes are like, one of them is hilariously entertaining, and I'm like, what book did you read?
That is odd.
I didn't find it funny at all. There's like small moments, I suppose, of observational humour.
Yeah.
But it's not like a comedy.
No.
And also like hilariously entertaining. Like you say, like I found it very engaging because it's just that the writing and the kind of these character studies were incredibly engaging. But there's not a lot of plot. Like it's not like a beach read. Well, not that. Sorry, whatever beach read means, but.
Yeah. People literally going about their days, like getting a bus ride and and the journey of that, and the
I just thought it was brilliant. I thought it
was
was amazing on the small ways that relationships fall apart, and I also thought it was brilliant on the way that like I really like as a woman like found it very like not wanting to like go into detail about my personal life, but like I found elements about like the way that you can feel trapped in relationships and your identity kind of slowly being sloughed away, like very, very observant, and I found it very melancholy and beautiful and also hopeful. It talks about, you know, like those moments where, you know, you recognise windows where you can change your life and most people don't, and the power of recognising that window. And I think that as someone who's maybe gone through some of those windows, it was sort of I found it very hopeful and beautiful, even though it was very sad. I just think her writing's amazing, and I love the way she wrote about London. And I wasn't expecting to get on with this book at all, but I really was very engaged and moved by it. Okay, so for me, this is on my personal shortlist.
And for me, it's no,
What?
unfortunately.
You got any book?
I know, but it's just the order we've been talking about tonight. Swan
Song by Kelleigh Greenberg-Jephcott.
And this was one of my favorite books that I read last year. I just love the glamour and the headiness and all the gossip, but as well all the like detail of the complicated relationships and friendships and falling out and people's ambitions, and I just love the whole experience of it.
And I liked all of that as well. I think for me it felt a little bit at times like I was reading very good creative non-fiction.
Okay.
Like I feel like there was I was fascinated by it, but as a novel I found it was a little bit long for me. And I think that there's big sort of stretches where it is quite like it's almost like character studies or like sort of vignettes about specific things that happened, and I guess because it's about real people's lives, you can't like
I mean, you could take some of the sections of it almost as novellas, sort of standalone almost, I think.
So I felt like I was almost either reading like a collection of like essays, creative essays and vignettes. So I really enjoyed reading it. I found it really interesting, and I did a lot of like Googling and looking up things. I found the women absolutely fascinating. I did really enjoy the like collective voice.
Sort of narrated.
I thought that was,
parts of it are narrated from we.
And I know that the whole point of the book is like that Capote brings them together, but like I must admit I find him an appealing person.
It's a very complicated person.
And I know that he's obviously not a straightforward person, however you feel about him, but and I know that without him there wasn't that link, but I almost I could have just read about the women.
Right,
had him
And it's
out
so
the picture.
fascinating when Harper Lee comes into it, and the little aspects, because I mean the crazy coincidence that Harper Lee and Truman Capote literally grew up next to each other
wild.
and grew up to
Yeah.
be these amazing
Wild.
novelists, and but very different people. I love that she's like brought all these really fascinating people from the past back to life, and you know, and given them their own integrity, whereas they would, you know, just sort of be a footnote, and
Absolutely.
as this of this novel that Truman Capote tried to write, or wrote part of, and you know, might have wrote full of, we don't even know if the full manuscript exists. He like playfully toyed with the idea that he might have hidden it somewhere, but it was never found. I thought it was a great experience, so which is why I would say yes.
Mine's no. I did enjoy it. There was just 6 books I enjoyed more.
You have to make a choice.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I wouldn't be mad if it was on the shortlist.
An American Marriage by Tayari Jones. And I had a really interesting experience of reading this, because I'd read this quite soon after reading If Beale Street Could Talk, because the film was coming out. I wanted to read it before the film, and like plot-wise, they're very similar books of the situation of what happens, but how she goes about it and what she focuses on is very different. I'd heard some criticisms of this book, but that it was sort of like a copy of If Beale Street Could Talk, but it's really not. It's very different from that. Part of why I really enjoyed it was that it's a lot of it is written in the form of letters back and forth, and I love epistolary novels, if you want to call it that, of because it just adds such an interesting psychological layer of people's expectations. You feel like people are sort of being slightly manipulative in how they're writing about things in a certain way, how they want it to be read, but then are really betraying things about their own character and their motivations, and I think that's really interesting, and I just find it really fascinating, this sort of spiky relationship between two people, which I find I couldn't be in a relationship like that, but I know a lot of people who are, and like and who are just sort of bickering and arguing all the time, and which is exasperated greatly by the situation they are in, that he's falsely imprisoned for something, and it's I
loved it.
I really enjoyed it. I was surprised by how much I liked it, because I sort of went in just sort of thinking it would be fine.
No, I thought it was brilliant. I think that, I guess for me, this is an example of a book about characters that are unlikable, but that I was really invested in them and rooted in them. Because they're not so much I guess it's that unlikability. For me, the woman in the Pisces is just unlikable. Right. Whereas these people, they're not likable. They're complicated and they're flawed and they make bad decisions. But I still was like fundamentally rooting for them. And I thought it was really interesting to have people in a situation where just because someone is wrongfully incarcerated doesn't mean that they're just like an angel of a person who never makes any other mistakes. And just because someone is in this situation, I just thought she really handled those balances of the conflicts of personhood really subtly, and like you just don't really know what you want to happen or what should happen or what's the best. And I just and I found Celestial, the woman, incredibly interesting as a character. I thought there's overlaps with ordinary people, just in terms of thinking about complicated marriages and relationships, and like how much loyalty matters, how much love matters, how much like what makes a relationship stick, what is enough to keep going even if there's problems, what is like how much do these different things matter. And I thought it was really, really
I would say to probably more for this, but I mean, I haven't finished reading Ordinary People, but this is more plot driven. There are some like twists in it that I sort of wasn't expecting, and that I was gripped by, like oh gosh, what's going to happen? Whereas in Ordinary People, it's just sort of going along and their lives, and you know, and they're
this is more American. That's maybe not fair. I mean, it is more American. I mean, this is very rooted in London. This is very rooted in America.
No, it's true.
Is this on your?
Yes. Actually, no.
Yes, it's not.
No. I know, and how I just talked about it.
I guess I know what's going to be on your...
you'd think I would go with it. It was very close. Number 1, Chinese Restaurant. This is another novel I've only read about a third or a half of.
I thought on a sentence by sentence level, I think she's a very good writer, and I would read other books by her. I also don't really eat Chinese takeaway, and during the course of this book, I ordered Chinese takeaway twice without realising why I was doing it. I was just like really craving Chinese, and I think she writes about food
Yeah.
really well, but the actual sort of plot of the book didn't really do it for me. The characters are, again, one of the main characters is a deeply unlikable man, and I was just a bit like, kind of found it hard to want him to succeed, and all of the characters are quite kind of complicated and not sort of straightforward, kind of. And so some sort of combination. And also the plot is quite like rooted in the mundane. I got a little bit bored reading it.
Yeah, and I feel, I mean, it's why I haven't finished reading it yet. Like sort of similarly to Ordinary People, I think it's good or maybe just fine, but it's not pushing me to like go all the way, keep reading it, and so I don't feel any urgency to sort of go back to it. I mean, I love the overall concept of like looking at a restaurant and looking at all the relationships with people behind sort of the scenes that and they're all complicated relationships with each other, and why they're there and where they are in their lives, but yeah, on the whole I'm just
Also, I didn't like the ending, which I won't like, not in any big dramatic way. I just was a bit like, didn't work for me. Right. So this is one of those books that I'm a bit like, I feel like when there's books that didn't get longlisted, this is one of those books where I'm a bit like, I didn't dislike it, but like when you hold it up to like something like America Is Not the Heart, I'm a bit like,
right, yeah,
like,
why is this on there rather than that?
Yeah, so I
think it's probably safe to say it's no.
Right, here we go. Bottled Goods.
Bottled Goods, short little book from a press that I think it's sort of worth noting that I think one of the judges of the prize is the director of Unbound, or organizes Unbound, it's an independent publisher. Yeah.
Oh, Aretha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so some of these books are by presses which I think don't get as much attention as some of the more mainstream presses. I think that's it's a great thing, and but, yeah. And then, it's published by Fairlight Books. But
having said that, this is great.
Yeah.
I liked elements of it. I felt like you could tell that some of it had been rooted in flash fiction, that some of it had been written outside of the novel, really kind of stitched together. And I also felt like the magical realism element kind of like is very erratically applied, and it's like at the start, and then it's really important at the end, and it's just not really present in the middle, and it just didn't like. I felt there was so much potential in it.
Yeah, and for me, like I was like with it for maybe like 3/4 of the way through it, and then it got to a point.
I'd say I was with half of it.
Okay.
Because also I felt like the central relationship as well, I didn't really kind of get like that. I didn't feel like we got enough of why they were in love with each other to kind of really care or understand why they were staying. Like
it really bothered me that they had a very antagonistic relationship, and then suddenly it was. And
I just feel like I didn't really. I feel like they were super in love without really realizing why, because he's kind of annoying at the start, and I'm like, I don't really understand why she falls in love with him, and then they have this super antagonistic relationship where like, I don't know why she doesn't leave him.
Yeah.
And then it's all like, it just felt like some really interesting short stories stitched together a bit messily into a whole that doesn't work.
Yeah, and I know other people had point of view about the magical realism that I could understand. I mean, I don't like using the term magical realism, but like, yeah, for want of a better, I don't know, term or concept of how it's handled, like, yeah, it's, and as a way of approaching a political situation, I can understand why that it would sort of make sense to approach it from that way, rather, but personally I would have preferred just more straightforward telling of a historical time period. I found it quite interesting.
I just didn't like how it was just not really present for huge swathes of the book, and it just felt a bit like, oh, we need to deal with this character. Let's like, it just was really inconsistent.
Yeah. And
I'd forgotten that was present until this very magical thing happens at near the end to move the plot along. I would be interested to read more of her flash fiction.
But yeah, just didn't really work for me.
As a novel.
No. Sorry. Or on this list, no.
My favourite. This is my favourite.
Oh. Okay. She's great, and yeah, well, like you said, like, it like totally made sense to me when I went to see her speak about this novel, that her previous book called Tell Me How This Will End, dealing with her experiences interviewing children who are coming to America from Central and South America, seeking citizenship and refuge. It like it totally made sense that she dealt with that in a nonfiction way before going to this and telling the story of basically it's a sort of family road trip going across America, of two parents. I always find it difficult to describe what their jobs are. They're sort of
audio archivists. They're recording sound.
Yeah, they're recording sound. I just enjoyed the complicated relationships in the family and where they were in their lives personally, and how these conflicts were arising amidst their journey, but then also looking at these larger issues, and it was really unexpected. The way it's told is so unique and interesting. How I'm gonna guess maybe the first half of the book is mainly from the mother's point of view, and it's very like analytical and thoughtful, and looking at big concepts, but then the plot goes into some place completely different.
And it's also interspersed by like
different sort of letters and or
like
pieces of records of
like
nonfiction, because as they're traveling they have all these boxes, physical boxes, which belong to some of them individually, and they keep things in their boxes which have a personal meaning for them.
It's so clever because there's another narrative voice that's not the mother, but there's also a book that's quoted that's not a real book that Louise Shelley wrote for this, and it's also got that in it, and it's so clever. I think it's just an example of a book that can be really clever and still incredibly readable and emotionally engaging. Also, I was reading, did you read about like how it's like pulls on, also there's the fact that there's photos at the end, and the photos are referenced, and it's just like a really clever way of doing it, and it's lots to do with the way she's engaged with other people's books as well. And there's like allusions and references to so much literature that I picked up on. I'm sure
Lord of the Flies and The Road by
Odyssey, and like Mrs. Dalloway. Like it's just so clever. I feel like it's a book that you could read over and over again and just get something new from it every single time. And so I just thought on a plot and a human level, I thought it was brilliant and moving, and thinking about the border crisis in America and how that is being dealt with,
and the whole way we talk about people who are undocumented in a country, and the language that we use around that, and the way they're sort of conceived and talked about, but there are also bits that are really funny too, because as they're going on this journey, they have some encounters, and the mother is very playful in how she presents her identity. Sometimes she makes up that they're from France, and they're doing
also
some things.
It has the two kids, the way that she writes, the way that they interact with each other and talk, I just thought was so true and funny, and it's like kids are. And also, so it just on a plot level, I thought it was extraordinary, and then also just think on like as a piece of literature, it's incredibly clever. And this isn't even her first, English isn't even her first language. The what? What? I just think it's kind of like, it's nothing like The Luminaries, but it made me feel like that. Like, it just works on every level, and there's so many layers, and you can read it and just enjoy it. But the more you think about it, and the more you sort of read what the more you can appreciate quite how clever it is. So, this is my favourite one.
I got so much out of it. There's so much.
So, no surprises. Yes! Is this the first one we've agreed on? Oh no, we've got lots of mutual no's. I think it's our first mutual yes. Okay.
Yay.
Right. Praise on
for the Butterflies by Bernice L. McFadden.
This is the one that would have been on my 6-book shortlist until I read Milkman.
Okay.
This is the one that I bumped.
And and I just went into this having no idea what it was about, and was totally surprised by it, and like impressed by the incredible economy of her writing. She writes these very short, brief chapters, but gets so much in them, and sort of quite at a fast pace moves through a lot of different situations, and it's just a very powerful story, but that at the same time, like, remember, deals with a lot of very difficult subject matter of the sexual abuse of children, young adults, and slavery, and
it's tough read. I thought it was incredibly affecting, and okay, so one of the things that I've heard some people didn't like the ending.
Okay.
That it was, I've heard the word saccharine, and thinking about normal people as well. I have an issue with the way I feel like we fetishize abuse. And again, it's part of the reason I didn't like A Little Life. And I feel like I loved this partly because I'm just gonna be spoilery about this because I think it's important. She suffers extreme abuse and it's something that she carries with her, but the ending is hopeful and she works through that to a point. She starts to try and find a way to live. And I'm so sick of books that are like, abuse equals you're forever fucked up and you're never going to get over it and this is going to be the most defining thing in your life and you're always going to have issues because of it. And I was like, I really enjoyed having a book where it's like you can experience really terrible stuff and there is hope and that doesn't have to define you forever and you can have a happy ending. And I'm sorry, my stomach's rumbling really loud. I don't know if you can hear it.
That's okay.
I thought that was great, and I wish there was more books that like that. And I'm talking in generalizations, and I know that there's more to both Normal People and A Little Life than that. But that was something that I found troubling in those books, and it was something I found refreshing in this book. Again, a happy ending for me it's not an uncomplicated happy ending. It's like a hopeful ending. Yeah. And for me, that's not saccharine.
No, it's interesting because I've heard that criticism too, but also a bit more, I guess, about the way she gets to that point. I've heard some people question the psychological process of getting to that point and how she works through her long-term abuse and basically moving from someone who is like quite literally just sort of comatose, like isn't able to function or interact. I've just totally questioned like how that process goes about, and and I don't know enough about examples of how that can be dealt with or should be dealt with. And
I think that probably the nature of the book, isn't it? Because it's short chapters and it skips time, and I guess that part of that is perhaps it's not like you don't see it on a page by page. You don't get to see that. You jump through time, and I guess that I get that can either work for you as a reader or not. Also, the author's done a lot of research into the actual situation of the ritual servitude situation. So
sort of hope on good faith that
Also, I'm totally like sometimes you just personally react to books, don't you? Or react against books, and like I don't know. I found this incredibly moving and beautiful, and I really liked it. And if I hadn't read Milkman, it would have been on my shortlist. And I nearly bumped a different book instead, and I don't know.
It's difficult to decide. Tough decision for the judges, but I would say yes.
For me, I'm like right. The next is right. The next one is Cersei.
Move on.
Because I didn't know whether to bump when I read Milkman is on my shortlist, and I didn't know whether to bump Cersei or Praise Song for the Butterflies, and I went back and forth between the two of them. So, and now just talking about that, I'm like, but I really enjoyed this as well. We talked about this a lot in our long list predictions.
We talked about it, and I just loved the experience of it, and I think she did it so well, and I think it's logical to say that it like either this if one of these books are going to be on either this or Pat Barker's novel, and I would completely pick this over
100%. Same.
I mean, it's not really fair to compare just because they
no,
deal
but it
with
does
the same
seem
subject
unlikely
matter,
that they're going to be.
I'm thinking logically and strategically about it that
I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was wonderful.
But I was gripped all the way throughout, and I was also moved and sort of swooned at bits of it. I just thought it's so gorgeously written, and even though she's won the Women's Prize before, that I think this still has a chance. So.
I agree. And I think as well it's one of those ones that I think because it was so beloved, I perhaps read it with a more critical eye than I would have. And so there's some things, we talked about this in our last video, like there's some things towards the end where I was a bit like, I moved from being completely in love with it to just, but I still really, really liked it all the way through. So actually I will keep that one.
So yes.
Yes!
Let's just say yes.
Yeah. Okay. Ghost Wall
by Sarah Moss.
Which I hadn't read. when we did our video, and I'm very happy that I have.
Yeah, it's
my
great.
second favourite. I really loved it. What she does in such a small amount of words is, I can't quite wrap my head around it. It's so good.
It's so impressive.
Yeah. I feel like everyone's already said this. I don't really have anything. Everyone's right. It's very, very good. Yeah.
You have to say
it's so affecting and tense, and I just didn't like how it's so tense, even though it's so short, and I didn't know what was going to happen, and I really thought the way she ended it was really clever and right, and like I won't be spoilery, but like it's just really good, and I just loved it.
Yeah, so like at the personal level of the story, I think it's so gripping and moving, and you're just totally with the characters, but then also think about larger issues that she's dealing with, and about the country right now, and ideas about nationalism and what that means, and what England means, and what citizenship means, and it's so good.
I think this is probably, without having seen the shortlist, I think this has got a very good chance to win.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, yeah, it's absolutely one of my top books, and also it's one that I was surprised again recently by. I went to this this group sort of reading where people were reading different sections of this aloud, and I read a section of it aloud, and everyone was laughing. There are parts of it which are so funny and clever, and how it's dealt with. I just love it in a book when you can visualize like just the scene totally and see it, and just how ridiculous is these sort of two girls coming out of the woods in these sort of burlap sacks, and just like and everyone reacting to that and being like, what are you doing? But yeah, the relationship between the two girls I think is so interesting.
So good.
Yeah, that friendship, because it's slightly encouraging on one side of the friend who's trying to make her realize that she's in this bad situation, in this bad family life, and that her father is a very complicated and abusive person, but on the other side that she's being seen in this way as like a northerner, and there's this sort of north-south divide, sort of snobbish attitudes towards people, different groups of people in the country, and just how that's dealt with is so good. It's amazing because it's very timely, but it also feels very kind of classic and timeless. I think just the mark of like really accomplished writer. This is clearly someone who knows what she's doing.
Yes. So no surprise.
Big yes.
Yes. Right, last one.
Finally, Normal People. Oh my gosh.
Which again we've already talked about.
Yeah.
Again, I think she's a very, very talented writer, but this book didn't quite work for me. We've talked about the kind of abuse thing that I thought was a bit like, I didn't think was very nuanced, and I also thought that it kind of played with tropes, like the awkward girl who puts on a pretty dress and everyone's like, she's beautiful, and I just feel like, I don't know, I feel like if she's satirising that, then that's one thing, but like we laugh at that trope, or not laugh at it, but like it's a trope, and I feel like there's a lot of tropes in this that people, it's not that I mind them, but I feel like it's hitting some familiar beats, isn't it?
Yeah, well, and I mean, she is self-consciously playing with,
writing.
because she's, this is basically in this like romantic tradition of literature.
I mean, how much she is playing with that and satirising stuff is up for debate, I think, based on interviews I've read with her. Right. And that changed my relationship with her writing as well. Oh, okay. Because I read an interview with her where... Stay away from interviews. No, because I remember last year, 2 years ago, that interview you read with Gwendolyn Riley really upped your ire about First Love. So I don't feel ire at this, but I do feel like, having read interviews about her approach to her writing, I question if she is being as satirical as I thought she was initially, and that has also made me like not as enthusiastic as I was previously.
And I mean, I take all of your points. I see them all, but yeah, as a reading experience, I just really enjoyed it, and
I was very engaged by reading it. So, like when I was reading it, I read it very quickly and was very engaged, and I really enjoy reading her writing. But as a whole, it didn't come together for me. So,
but for me it did, so I say yes.
These are the ones that are on between us. Either both of us or one of us has picked.
Oh gosh, we've got a lot.
So I've got, there's 4. We both have 4 unique ones though. So there's 2 in common. So we both have Ghostfall and Cersei. So these are personal wish lists. So if we were going to try and pick a prediction, okay, Ghostfall.
Yes.
Let's put out any that we think are.
So we both say Cersei and Ghostfall, right?
Yeah, and I think they've both got, I would say they are likely to be shortlisted. Okay. I have to. Surely.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know anyone who's read it who hasn't. Right. Okay. And now we have. Okay, if we're doing predictions, I think normal people probably will be shortlisted.
Yeah, I think it's very likely.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
We're
Predicting though. We're predicting.
Yeah. I would say Praise Song for the Butterflies and American Marriage.
I would be very happy to see Praise Song for the Butterflies shortlisted. I'm not sure. Yeah. I think I must admit I do think Ordinary People is in with a strong shot. But I'm happy as a joint prediction. Then that's a good joint prediction.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Without thinking about this is very much just like based on our discussion, not having gone into any like.
Yeah.
We've not like spent a lot of time comparing all the different books next to each
other.
No,
if we were actual judges, we would like sit down for a few hours and thresh this out. But I mean, I really want Swan Song to be on the shortlist, but it's we'll see how it goes. But
there's not many that I think are just. There's not many that are out of the running. I don't think. To me, there's maybe only 2 or 3 that I think are very unlikely to be shortlisted. And anyway, that is our personal shortlist, our personal favourites.
Yeah, and
a stab at a joint prediction.
We'll see how we do.
Very excited to see.
But I'll be so interested to know other people's thoughts about this.
Yes.
If you had reactions to these books, if you've read any of these books, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Or if you're very curious to read some of these books now based on how we've talked about them, let us know.
Or we've completely put you off.
Yeah, we've put you off. Hopefully not.
No, I hope not. No.
But yeah, if you want to make a stab at prediction of the shortlist, put that in the comments below, and then we'll see on Monday. The what's the date? 29th? Yeah, 29th. Then when the shortlist will be announced, and it'll be very exciting to see.
And we will, even though we've already talked about them, we probably will still do another video, at least trying to predict the winner.
Yeah, maybe a shortlist reaction, but if not, then we'll get together and talk about the 6 shortlisted books and who we think and hope will win.
Yes.
And those may be different from each other. But
I feel like we have less usually I feel like we overlap a lot more with stuff like this and have more similar. Yeah. But I think
we had very different personal reactions to some of these books. So.
And that's the great thing though, isn't it? About like sometimes like you're just personal as your sort of reader overrides any kind of critical engagement with it, and that's kind of the beauty of reading. And we wouldn't care so much about it, would we, if we didn't feel so much about it. So. Yeah,
and have such personal reactions. But also one of the things I love about prizes, again, in talking about books, because I've got so much more from seeing other reactions to which were completely separate from mine, but made me really see it from a different perspective.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and actually, even just like the serendipity of hearing you talk about Lost Children Archive whilst I was reading Freshwater, and it really like helping me articulate how I felt about that. It's just. Good.
Books are great.
In summary.
Yes. Okay, so thank you for watching, and we'll speak to you again soon. Bye, everyone.